Good afternoon and welcome to Ask the Expert from BC Training. Today's subject is supply chain business continuity planning and how critical it is for the SMB market. Our panelist is Ralph Petti, industry expert and managing director of Continuity Dynamics. If you would like to ask Ralph any questions during the webinar, please do so by typing in the question box on the control panel to the right of your screen. The webinar will last a maximum of an hour, and later today we will email a copy of the recording over to you. Our next webinar will be part of the BCI's Education Month and will take place on Friday the 22nd of September at 11 a.m. Chris Rhodes and Gordon Brown from Plan B Consulting will be presenting the webinar titled Out with the Old, In with the New, Changing Perceptions of Business Continuity. Information about signing up to attend will be released in due course. So today we are covering supply chain business continuity planning. Ralph is a panelist, so I will hand you over to him. I'll just be 2 seconds with that. Ralph, have you?
Okay, I'm here.
You should be able to show your screen now.
Okay, there it is.
There we go.
Can you see a
Great,
full screen?
perfect. I'll lead you through it then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
My pleasure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ralph Petti, and I'm a certified business continuity professional, and I've only been doing this for 33 years. So I've been through 650 disaster events in 4 different continents, and I really love my job. And I really value the fact that all of you are listening, and you value how important your jobs are, because it's so important to be prepared. As we all know, you can never eliminate risk, you can always minimize it. And as we go through our daily activities, what we need to do is just consider every possible way that we can look at the risks that are out there and minimize them as best we can. You know, you walk your daughter to school and you hold her hand, you make sure you look both ways and across the street, and you're taking care of those things. You drive in the local lanes on the highway, and you're making sure that you're not in the fast lane so that you're a little bit safer. And I'm sure these are practices that we all adopt individually, because I know when there's an ice storm or a windstorm outside, I'm not just thinking that there'll be a few branches that come down or a few roads that are impassable. I'm thinking about the larger implications, as many of you are, where there are power lines that come down, or there are car accidents, or folks that cannot get to dialysis treatments and such. So we think globally in that regard. One really critical area that we all have to think about, which is kind of a newer area over the last 10 years, but it's still emerging as a keynote topic, is supply chain business continuity planning. You could be as well prepared as possible in your own environment and be able to have everything perfectly in order and have tested and done exercises with your personnel, with your all the different resources, your facility and such. But the minute you reach across and out to one of your supply chain partners, if they're not equally prepared, you're going to be in a situation where they're going to be perhaps letting you down and not able to work with you. I had a meeting in the Washington, D.C. area yesterday with a large mortgage services firm with about 900 employees. And we talked at length about supply chain partnering, and they have a very solid plan, our client, the mortgage company. However, with regard to the supply chain people, they've never done any rehearsals or exercising with their supply chain partners. So we're putting them on a schedule where once a year, every 6 months, they do their internal business continuity exercises, and then once a year, on the alternate 6 months, they'll do something with a selected group of supply chain partners. And this is particularly important when you look at transportation, communication, power, all the key elements that can prevent you from having a business scenario, you're running your business naturally. So I'm going to hit the first button here and make sure that everybody can see the next slide. Okay. Rebecca, can we all see that next slide? The one that says
yeah.
agenda?
Are you all right to just full screen your slide if you can, please? Just so you go into PowerPoint mode. That would be much better.
How's that?
Perfect.
Better?
Thank you. I'll leave you to it again.
You're my guardian angel. Don't go too far. Okay. So the agenda today, and again, we have about 50 minutes or so, and then we'll have some questions at the end. And I appreciate some folks that have already submitted some questions. And please feel free to submit as many questions as you can. Let's cover many of the topics, but if I see a question come up that's pertinent to the screen that we're on, we can address that. But basically let you know who I am, what my focus is, talk about some of the objectives in this industry, how it relates specifically to supply chain, and also some statistics about where people can fail and otherwise. We'll give some examples of supply chain failures during disaster events, which is critical because you can plan. When there's an actual disaster event, you've got to make sure that all the dots are connected and all the dominoes fall in the right direction. Review some key questions for you to think about what you need to do for supply chain planning. We'll talk about resiliency within your supply chain. What are your measurements, alternate plans, what you can do better, and then do a bit of a summary. Now, I will call to your attention at the bottom of the screen, this presentation was made in Philadelphia in May. It'll be made in New York in October. I'll be presenting it several times. And we had a very enthusiastic audience when we presented this before. It's titled the Disaster Conferences as the host, and it's in partnership with Continuity Insights, Bob Nakow, and the groups that they have here in the U.S., and people come from all over the world. So it's a tried and true presentation. We're delighted to be using it. It's with their permission, and again, it's been vetted by the folks that are our hosts for today. Trying to get down to the next slide. My apologies. There we go. So credentials. I hit the, all I have to do is hit enter and it works out fine. So my credentials, I'm certified as a member of the Business Continuity Institute in London. I've been a member of that association for 12 years. I'm a certified business continuity planner with the DRII. And then I added one a few years ago, the governance, risk, and compliance professional, which I thought would be very important, especially in the financial and healthcare sectors. GRC is a critical area, and it's something that I thought would make sense. I've been a VP with a number of the companies, as you can see there, SunGuard, Comdisco, Veritas, Lucent, and I've been a subject matter expert in the area of human resources. And again, yesterday at this meeting, our host was the VP of Human Resources, and in the U.S. there's a group called SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management, which has 320,000 members. So I encourage you in your areas to please take a look at engaging and involving the human resource personnel within your companies to come in and do whatever they can to help you understand what's something that they can do for business continuity planning. So the emphasis that I have and that a number of my business partners have is that we're really focused on the supply chain planning. And I mentioned SMB, which is small and medium-sized business, the small business being less than 100 employees and 50 million in revenue, and then the larger businesses up to 1,000 employees. And that is a critical market. And I want to just take a moment and focus on that because we have an opportunity to look at those types of companies because those companies are the ones that incorporate our supply chain. So you may have a very large company like a large insurance firm or a large transportation or an international airline, and they do have their top folks that are providing certain services and doing things for them. However, they have a number of companies that are always going to be there, the little guys, that are going to be able to help out. And in many cases, there are regulations in place where these companies have to employ 15 or 20 or 25% of the small and medium-sized businesses, or those that are either ethnically or LGBT or in different categories, where they have to have participation from diverse organizations. So you may have small companies that have 50 employees providing a key resource to your company as a large company. So that makes up a great deal of the supply chain for many of these firms, perhaps even for yours as well. So it's something that has to be considered as something of your planning. So the objective for today is to review the small and medium-sized business partner issues related to the BCPM, and as it relates to supply chain, and then explore any corresponding solutions. I put a few sources there that have collected information from the BCI, from DRJ, Disaster Recovery Journal, from DRII, Disaster Recovery Institute International, Rockdove Solutions, a provider of crisis management solutions, the U.S. SME Toolkit for small and medium-sized businesses from the U.S. website, and other companies such as MaxQ, Continuity Dynamics, my firm, StayInBusiness.com, and the Gartner Group, which is, again, a think tank for a lot of folks in this area, and something that makes sense for us to all pay attention to these organizations. So for the supply chain partners, believe it or not, they do touch over 80% of a company's assets. And that's a remarkable number because you look at your organizations and you might have 10 or 15 or 20 different business departments comprising your entire organization. Well, what's happening is that you've got an opportunity for each of those organizations to make sure that they are doing their own thing. Now, where IT, information technology or information services, is usually the backbone of an organization and maintaining relationships with the service providers for power, for data backup, for all different areas of an organization. Other organizations like human resources, personnel, marketing, transportation, sales, any of the other areas, administration, finance, legal, they all may have their own partners with whom they're engaged. So someone may have market services or transportation tables or something that's available, warehousing and inventory. We had one question that was submitted to us about a company that distributes over 4,000 products individually worldwide. They're an international firm with a presence in the U.S. as well as many other countries, and they wanted to know what the value to business would be and what some of the obstacles in tracking some of those. So that's just one example. We'll address that question later, where the supply chain partners do touch 80% of a company's assets, and they touch 75% of a company's employees. So if you're a company with 1,000 employees, 750 of your employees are interfacing with supply chain partners. So why wouldn't that be a critical component? And the reason that we've put this presentation together and that we've added this to our suite of solutions for our host today is the fact that a lot of folks don't really reach out to those folks. And we need to get more of a mindset squared away so that people can see what are some of the factors. So the issues are supply chain networks are subject to much higher risks. You know, when you do it all internally, you're fine. At least you believe you're fine, you've tested, but when you reach out a little bit, there are variables. Your supply chain may have changed leadership, your supply chain may have moved, your supply chain may have merged, your supply chain may not be the best possible provider for you anymore, and then the cost of the secondary and tertiary supply chain partners can vary. Your primary supplier might give you the best deal and help your margins be the most favorable for you, but if they're not available for some reason, your secondary and tertiary supply chain partners can vary in terms of their deliverables of timetable, of costing, and so forth and so on. The sales demand is more uncertain if your service level agreements are not met and any deadlines. So you might have an SLA that you're going to get a certain deliverable of a service or a product within 24 hours. But again, if there's a high demand due to a holiday period or a vacation period or whatever that might be, you may not be able to meet those SLAs because of that. And then you might have some credible standby partners that say, oh, I can always call ABC company to help me if XYZ is not available, and they may not realistically be able to respond. A good example of that is if you needed to relocate from your premises to another location, how do you do that? Well, we call the hotel in the nearby town because we know the banquet manager and he's able to take care of us. Well, most people would know that banquet manager. So you want to be not in a first come first serve scenario, you want to put an MOU, a memorandum of understanding or something in place ahead of time so you've got that person available knowing that in the event of a disaster event, you're going to be going over there and you're going to be making available their use of their solutions. Again, I invite any questions to come across the board at any time. That would be appreciated as we go through some of these points. Next slide. Okay, so some examples of some major small, medium-sized business supply chain failures. You've got three major corporations here that are listed. You've got Boeing, you know, the building of the jetliners, Target Corporation, which is their Canadian marketplace entity, and then Hershey, which is our favorite because they provide the sweets that make us all happy in life. So Boeing, we'll start with that example. They're making the 787 jetliners, and they were trying to rush through some deadlines, but there were some key members of the supply chain that could not respond to the need. So when they went out and they asked for proposals, and they provided a certain number of, or a certain percentage of supply chain companies that were smaller, that not the major corporations, but the smaller ones that provide certain services. So somebody like GE might be providing engines for them, or United Technologies could be providing other resources or what have you, but there was a local company that provided a certain capability. They just couldn't respond because the deadline was heightened and the company had promised to make a commitment to a certain service level and they could not respond. They have to take a look at not only the actual deadline of what you're doing under normal times, but the elasticity of an organization to expand and be able to respond if it becomes crunch time. Target Canada, they actually departed the Canadian marketplace because the infrastructure was too dependent on many local companies due to regulations, and they couldn't meet the demands. So at the point in time when I captured this information, Target Canada had left the Canadian marketplace and expanded in other locales, primarily in the USA. And Target is a convenience store that is similar to a Sears or a Kmart that has many, many different types of products. So you've got many, many different types of inventory. So when you look at a Walmart or a Target or a Home Depot or some other stores that provide solutions, they're usually looking at just-in-time inventory. So they may have a truck that pulls up at noon on a given day to replenish their shelves, and that truck knows exactly what to bring, and it may have 3,000 different items because someone bought items for the bathroom or someone bought items for their automotive section, and they bring just the information, it's just-in-time inventory to bring. So Target was depending upon many local companies and couldn't meet the demand. The third example is Hershey, the great chocolate meltdown. They could not meet the demands to deliver over $100 million in candy by Halloween. And they called it the Great Chocolate Meltdown because that was a situation where they depended upon some local couriers and some local instances. There were some weather factors. Hershey is in Pennsylvania, and it's in an area where there's some hills. And if we're talking about Halloween, we're talking about in the U.S. some nor'easters or some other issues that could be occurring. But I have a little joke for you here that the Hershey Corporation really owns the town of Hershey, Pennsylvania. That's where they were founded. And there's a beautiful amusement park there, and there's a wonderful hotel, and then you can take tours of the factory. But do you know what the name of the restaurant in the hotel, the lounge in the hotel is at the Hershey Hotel? It's called the Candy Bar. And even though you're all on mute, I can hear you all smiling at the fact that the Hershey Corporation has a hotel called the Candy Bar. So your categories of local supply chain failures for the SMB market, again, local, because I'm focusing on that because a major corporation may look local or may look regional in nature, but it's all about personnel. It's all about communications. It's all about transportation, facilities, utilities, healthcare, and others. So when you look at this slide, when you're planning for a disaster in your facility, and let's say you're in an area where you get a tremendous amount of rain and flooding, or you're in an area north in the UK where you have a lot of snow or other areas where you're affected, you look at the elements in your own planning. So it's no surprise to see that the number one culprit of loss of power, 72% of the time, loss of power is the culprit in a disaster event. Well, that falls under utilities. And then personnel, well, that falls under an area where you have loss of key personnel and communications and so forth and so on. So these line up very well with the general disaster planning that you do internally at your organization, where you may want to look externally for your supply chain partners. So you have to ask them the tough questions. We'll get into some specifics in a little while, but you have to ask them the tough questions because you have to make sure that they're on the same page where you are and make sure that they're doing everything that you can possibly ask them to do. So a rhetorical question. Is your firm focused on today's SMB needs? Are you really thinking about what you can do to be a good partner for them as much as them being a good partner for you? Yesterday's thinking was, well, we could be a little more complacent, more confident, more liberal in our thought and planning. There might have been less accountability and minimization of real-time tracking. Things got done, or maybe they got done tomorrow. You didn't have to necessarily go with the same primary vendor. You could trade it up to a secondary or tertiary vendor, but you were a little more complacent in that thinking. Today, you need to know exactly where things reside. We're in a follow the moon world where we are on a 24/7 schedule all the time, and we have to respond, especially with call centers, especially with service areas that you can pick up a tube of toothpaste. There's an 800 number, and that's got to be a 24/7 number for someone to call. So you have to know exactly where things reside. And there are so many tools to make that happen. And the question is, are you using those tools? There are also unique network frameworks and applications and inclusive delivery teams to make sure that everybody is coming through for you. So when you set up a methodology to run your systems and to run your end-to-end processing and such, you have to make sure that you have everything you need in place. You want to be collaborative and share your resources and cooperate with your disaster recovery testing exercises. So I'm mentioning disaster recovery here specifically because for years and years and years when I first got into this business, and perhaps many of you as well, it was all about disaster recovery. That's all it was called. We didn't have crisis management. We didn't have communications. We didn't have a lot of different areas that focused on specificity, supply chain planning. Now we've got, cyber planning and active shooter planning, and all these different resources, all these different things that are remarkable by today's standards that didn't exist before. So now it's a matter of really making sure that you have what you need to be inclusive and making sure that all those areas are there, well beyond disaster recovery testing, into the business continuity domain. And that's especially true, as I said, in the retail, service, and manufacturing industries. Of course, it's in all industries, but your customer-facing areas are retail, where someone walks in your store, they look for that product, and it's not available. Or they call your service center, or your manufacturing deadlines are there. The mortgage company with whom I engaged yesterday, they had a need to make sure that they could deliver mortgages. Even though they're based in the Washington, D.C. area, they're an international company. They have different regulations in different countries, and they have to be attuned to what those regulations are. So they need to make sure that they have everything that they need in order to be successfully delivering solutions. So there's a printing organization with whom we engage in the Midwest of the U.S., and we put a document in there. Every proposal that they hand out, compete for printing services, it says on the last page, we'll be there for you. So if someone in the Northeast wants to do the printing in the Midwest, and the Midwest has flooding or some sort of an incident that affects that local facility that's going to be providing the resource and the delivery of those printed devices, printed documents, they can outsource it to another printer in another location electronically, and they can, make it move to an area where they're able to get whatever they need to get done. So that's important. So the SMB firms are getting more opportunities. I said most major firms need to maintain certain goals to engage the SMB market. They may help them to meet race, gender, diversity, or other specifications. In some cases, these are smaller, less mature organizations, so we're defining them on this page that are being selected. And they're buying local, which is a nice thing to do. We're working with a construction management firm in Philadelphia building a very large tower complex, and they have some major vendors that are providing steel and concrete and electrical and plumbing, but they're engaging 20% of their workforce as small and medium-sized businesses. And they're being complemented because they're buying local. They're engaging regional firms, but these firms we've seen may not have the experience or the resources, so we're working with them on a smaller basis to put in place more appropriate plans, something that's less expensive, but something that's equally successful in making them meet their needs. And they just don't have the business continuity plans in place to enable them to respond. Some of those littler firms, which again is the subject of this presentation. So for everyone on this call, you've got to consider who those firms are that are in your purview, that you're working with, to make sure that they're all capable of doing what you need for them to do, and to make sure that they're going to show up when you need them to show up. So you want to create resiliency in your own supply chain. You look at the third-party providers and what the pitfalls would be. You want to take your business continuity model you have right now and kind of emulate it, and show your partners what they have and what they need, or to the areas in which you aspire them to be successful. They may find something online or do something of their own or do a Google search, and that's something that would be satisfactory, but you want to make sure that it's really what is going to meet your needs as a third-party provider. So when you're outsourcing, you have to know who's delivering the tasks and what those SLAs are. So for this construction management firm, if they assign the electrical wiring to a major firm and they have subcontractors doing the work, then you have to understand where the chain ends. This is the requirement, and all the requirements spelled out specifically have to be passed along to the next person that's in the chain to make sure that they have exactly what they need to meet the initial specification. And when you've got several layers of outsourcing due to specialization, you've got to really make sure of that. And you have to know that fourth bullet's very important. You have to know where your supply chain begins and ends. You have to know that you're going to someone to work with you, and is that the company you're really depending on, or are they going to another level of support, or is there changing management? Do you have a contact that's changed, someone you've worked with for 3 years that you're quite comfortable with, but now all of a sudden there's a new person on board and there's a learning curve? You have to know, where they're involved, and you have to make sure that the flow of information and communication is absolutely crisp, so that in this world where you've got real-time processing and real-time delivery and just-in-time inventory, everybody needs to know what's going on. Ask for their plan and scrutinize it if it were your own. Take a good look at their business continuity plan, see what they're doing, try to figure out what some of the areas are where there may be some weaknesses, and let them come back to you and say, okay, this is what we're doing, and is it good enough? And you have every right to say, no, it's not. We need to get from this standard at a certain level, perhaps 30% or 40% of satisfaction, to the larger firm to a 70 or 80% level where they'll be hitting their mark. And then you've got your KYV, Know Your Vendor Compliance Check. So there are some companies out there that can help you scrutinize and qualify your vendors. I'm not going to name any names of companies on this call. We can take that offline. You'll have my contact information on the last slide. If you want to reach out to me individually, I can work with you and provide several vendors, because we're a vendor agnostic organization. Continuity Dynamics, we don't provide any, we don't have our own software. We recommend certain solutions in a lot of different buckets, from crisis management to emergency management to business continuity to disaster recovery, so forth and so on. So there are some KYV vendors that are out there to help you with your own compliance checks. So we talked generally about these, but I want to get into some specifics that these ideas are out there right now. Use them. Benefit from someone else who might have been a bleeding edge or leading edge firm that took a chance 5 or 10 years ago and said, we want to do things with our supply chain partners that are, that are in a certain regard, and they've been adopted. So when we got into this business, and I would say 50 years ago, it became fashionable to be backing up your systems and providing business continuity and disaster recovery. Even though we didn't have the differentiation of the names, everybody was kind of disaster recovery oriented. That was the term. And now it's matured so much more in my career and in many of our careers that we have to just make sure that we understand that there are resources out there that make a lot of sense. So to better collaborate, understand who they are and who they're dependent upon. For example, a residential contractor might be assigned a project where they have to build homes in a certain area at a certain specification by a certain date. If you were part of the investment firm building these homes, would you just assume that the standards would be met, or would you drill down? So you have to understand that you are an investor in this case of a development of perhaps 100 homes or cottages that are being built, and you really want to understand what's going on. I'm sure if you're on this call and you're interested in the subject matter, you've got products or solutions that tie into supply chain companies, or you're exploring this idea for the first time. So this is an important precept and tenet, that you want to make sure that you have an audit trail to understand what's happening. The second example is identify your key or unique suppliers. And the first example is wonderful. Did you know there's only one company globally that made a small coupling device needed to connect the rotary blades for most helicopters? There's one company. And it's amazing because you think that there'd be other companies, but this company has been doing this forever, and it's like it's something that is a well-proven product. But if there were some issues, now we'll tell you a little story. In Fukushima, I drive a Nissan vehicle, and I can't get windshield wipers for my car anymore that are made by Nissan because the factory was near Fukushima, and now they're out of business, or they're trying to relocate them. So I've been to Fukushima. I was there 4 years ago. I've been within 100 miles of it, and I saw, it looked very calm from where I was, but the thing that really struck me was the fact that there was not a lot of activity, even 100 miles or so away. And it was an area that you could tell was blighted, and that, and there were some issues. So I have to buy generic windshield wipers for my car. So some of these really don't come back, some of these areas where you're looking for a specific need. The third example is you want to conduct testing and exercise drills to see where they stand. So there are many Fortune 500 companies that have thousands of supply chain partners. You look at companies like Microsoft, where they have tens of thousands of developers, and these in some regard or another are supply chain partners. Or companies like major corporations or major financial institutions or automobile manufacturers, thousands of supply chain partners in specialized areas, each one important. Each one has individually negotiated an agreement with the parent company that says we can do X for you by Y, and provide the example of C, or the deliverable of C. So you're able to make sure that you've got all those companies that are covered. And you have to check on them periodically, or at least send out some specs to ask them on a questionnaire basis, at least for the smaller ones, to make sure that they go into doing the kinds of things that they can be supporting you. So this goes way beyond the disaster recovery tests that conclude, okay, the data's backed up. And as I said, that is so 1970s. But today is a need to prove you can be a strong link. So what most companies are doing now They're doing a lot of insourcing within their own company, so they're providing redundant data centers, redundant lines of business, redundant call centers, anything they can do to make sure that they take this and internalize it. So if there is a disaster event, they know that they've got facility B that can support facility A internally. There's no competition for that site. They tested it. Perhaps it runs as a node on their network at all times. Then all of a sudden we go live. I'll give you an example. There was a bank in California, in the San Francisco area, that had a location in New York City. And during the San Francisco earthquake back in October of 1989, there was a loss of power in the entire area. And my client was testing at a recovery facility, their New York office. They were actually testing at one of the primary service provider recovery facilities. And when the disaster struck and they lost their primary facility, they immediately moved over and ran from there, just by coincidence, ran from the recovery center. So they had a plan in place, and we're going back 29 years ago, 1989 or so, 28 years ago, where they had a plan in place at the time of disaster recovery to fail over, but their people didn't have anywhere to go. They had maybe 10 cubicles in a location, and they had hundreds of employees. So nowadays, you've got to make sure that not only your employees can serve you, but your supply chain employees and other folks with the small businesses can serve you. So if there's a regional outage and you need to do something to make sure that you show up and you're able to be responsible for the companies that are depending upon you, you've got to have a plan in place. So you can't just do, okay, our disaster recovery test worked, our data was exchanged, we were able to access it, we had some data that was being journaled or vaulted or shadowed, or we pay a little more to have the more critical data running in the same swim lane or right next to where the live data is to make sure there's an immediate failover. But guess what? We're not really talking about data anymore, because there's some wonderful technologies out there. We're talking about making sure the business can recover. Business continuity, continue the business, as we all know, and make sure this, it trickles down to the supply chain people. So can you make sure that your supply chain partners' logistics will work? And again, in the U.S., during September 11th, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Hurricane Sandy in New York, and other wide-ranging calamities, major roads were impassable. Airplanes were grounded. Trains were delayed. I was in New York City on September 11th. I worked in the World Trade Center on September 11th. I was not there. I worked for Morgan Stanley as a consultant in September, that summer of 2001, 16 years ago, and they relocated me to work on another project in a location on Park Avenue about 4 miles away. And I was there working at that facility when the towers were hit, that horrible, horrible day. And I called my wife, and I said, sweetheart, I'm fine. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, are you watching TV? And she said, why? And that was the last I spoke to her for 9 hours, because there was no communications. There was no way to get off the island of Manhattan. And the only thing we had was I went out and bought a radio, so I put a headset on and listened to the news to hear what was going on, as we always do in those situations. So are the logistics going to work? I just gave you an example where the communication lines were down, the transportation accesses were gone, the bridges and tunnels were closed because they were afraid that there were terrorists in Manhattan, and we've all had calamities in your own backyards all over the world with some of the recent bombings, and most recently, what happened in Barcelona and in other areas with different subway systems in London and Tokyo and a number of other places. I had a holiday in Madrid a month or so ago with my wife, and we get off the plane, and okay, it's armed guards, of course, at all the airports. So it's a different world we live in, but the world we live in, those things can affect us, and we're prepared, but are our supply chain people prepared? So ask the tough questions, that third bullet, that will assist in their understanding. It's not going to be reprimanding them or admonishing them. It's a lesson. So you want them to survive. They're a quality company. You chose them. They may not have the experience and resources that you have, and you want them to survive and actually thrive and do well in this world. So you want to treat them as if they're a larger firm. They do have a place at your table. They do have a key component of your supply chain, of your deliverable. They are one of the key dominoes between you running your business from point A to point B and all those steps along the way, A prime, A2, A3, whatever. They're one of those components along the way. So you look at McDonald's and other fast food chains, other chains, they buy their bread and ingredients locally. It's good for business, good for the community. But they ensure that things are always available, so they do have a backup plan. You go to a Starbucks and they're going to source their milk locally. from a local dairy or what have you, but they have 2 or 3 lined up beyond that because they're thinking in those terms. But they want to make sure the primary suppliers have the resources to survive and respond to them. Okay, so what about crisis communication? I did want to talk about crisis communication because it's something that has to be done immediately. Something happens and you have to deal with your organization and you have to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And there's a couple of different definitions of this term. You've got crisis communication, which is the process by which you're going to be telling the world what you're doing and how it's being done. And a lot of that has to be done ahead of time. And you have to be involving your SMB partners, your supply chain partners, and not just the little guys, but all your partners. So during the Exxon Valdez spill in Alaska, or the BP oil spill in the Gulf region, or the recall of Tylenol many years ago from Johnson & Johnson, or any of these events, Enron, any of these events that have happened anywhere in the world, you've had situations where you need to go out and tell the world what's going on. And you have to have the right person making that presentation, the right person as a spokesperson. And the person that's most believed by the company usually is the CEO or the person or the CFO, someone that has a fiduciary responsibility, especially for publicly traded organizations. So that person is just not going to get up and say, this is what happened and this is how we're dealing with it. There needs to be a script, even a generic script, set up ahead of time so that you can enter into the world of crisis management. So you have a communications plan, you have a script, you have a team of people, there's succession planning in place so that if something happens and your CEO is on vacation or on a flight somewhere or a couple of levels of management are together in a meeting and you can't reach them for whatever reason, you have to say, okay, it's like who's going to ascend the position of importance and be the speaker of that organization. Let's go through some ideas. So the most impactful step of a disaster response is when something occurs, the need for information is paramount. Now, of course, the most important thing in any disaster event is ensuring that your people, your personnel, and your other folks are safe and sound. So we'll take that out of the way because that's always number one. I hate the term human capital management, but that's a term that everyone uses these days. And I've been a human resource professional for a dozen years. But you've got to really focus on the people first and then the business. So you need information. It needs to be crisp, precise, honest, sincere, both internally and externally. You can't have someone standing in the driveway as the news media truck comes up and saying, yeah, we did smell smoke before the alarm went off. And you just can't do that. You have to have everybody on your team knowing that you have to make sure that there's one voice. And if you're a supplier for Johnson & Johnson or for a Lloyd's Bank or for another Mercedes-Benz or some other major organization, you really have to defer to the major organization. You could be someone that's at that facility that's working that day that is on a project, but you can't be the one that's going to talk to someone outside, as we all know. So you have to make sure that your supply chain partners are on the same page. Are they affected? Do they need special attention? Can they respond? Is there something that impacted them based on the fact that they had a situation where they needed to come to the table and be able to work with you? So you have to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So peer-to-peer dialogue with management is key. So your line of communications at the peer level, your HR people talking to your supply chain HR people, your executives talking to your other executives. When I was in New York City and I called my wife and I said that I was fine, and she said, what are you talking about? If I couldn't reach her at 8:41 that morning, she may have called my office and said, oh my goodness, my husband was affected by this event. And of course I would not be able to answer the phone because the phones were down. And she may have called a colleague and tried a few cell phones, but she would eventually call human resources or personnel or some group that was responsible for the betterment or the well-being of the individuals in the company. That's where they would call in most cases. So you want to make sure that those lines of communication are at peer levels because you want to investigate the activity, assess the situation, review your options, and then take action. You don't just read, you may read the script that says, and what many communication specialists say, you have 30 seconds in 3 sentences to provide 3 thoughts. For example, our building was affected by a regional disaster today. We're doing our best to make sure that our employees are safe and all of our commitments are being met. We will provide information to you as soon as possible. That's about 28 words. I've said that before, and it took about 30 seconds to say that. But you want to be responsive and genuine and sincere about what you're saying to someone and saying, okay, the CEO, he stood up, he said what he had to say, he did it within moments of the event happening or within a half an hour, reasonable time. So he didn't avoid the issue, and he made sure. So the SMB companies, they're a little bit smaller, a little less in the focal point, but they must be in lockstep with all the other parties. So if the security is provided locally and they cannot respond, if they don't have a way to be involved, and when I say security, I mean, as part of the whole process and the sequence of events and such, if one domino does not fall, the other ones may not fall. So you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, so that if I am a subcontractor working for Mercedes-Benz and Mercedes-Benz has an issue or another firm has an issue, I want them to say what's going on. I don't want to provide my opinion, because that could be counter to the relationship. So these are some specific actions to take under the area of crisis communication, and I put a note that this is specifically courtesy of a company, Rocked Up Solutions, which is in the Washington, D.C. area, which has crisis management solutions. It's called In Case of Crisis, but I mentioned that because they really helped me put these slides together, and my appreciation goes to Chris Britton, their president. So the specific actions you need to take with all partners is, once a problem affects your customers, do not wait to go public. On the crisis communication, crisis management, information dissemination, and just facing the public and facing your own employees, don't wait. Just go out there and tell everybody what's going on as quickly as you can, or else conjecture will begin, the rumors will start, and you can lose face with some of the folks out there. Don't forget to be sympathetic. I'm not being crass here. I'm saying that you do have to have a certain measure of empathy towards everyone involved in a situation. Something happened, a process broke down, a terror event occurred, a weather event occurred, something happened, and you did the best you could. Remember, you can never eliminate risk. You can only minimize risk. So something happened. Maintain a consistent brand voice. If you've got a spokesperson speaking about the issue, that person should be the go-to person all the way through. If that person is not the right person because your CEO is on plane, that person is the interim spokesperson, or the reins get handed over to the CEO once he or she comes back into the fold to make sure that they're on par. Pre-plan your response. Make sure you write something down. Demonstrate corrective action. As I said in my example, we're taking the necessary steps to understand the situation and to make sure that everyone is safe and we can get the business going as soon as possible. And go beyond the superficial. Don't say that, well, the weather affected a lot of businesses and we're just one of them. No. You want to say that we are impacted by the weather events, we've made these preparations, and we're doing the best we can to recover. And then, of course, respond using the appropriate channels. So you want to make sure that you go broadly into all the different organizations. In the political climate, you want to speak to all the different news networks. You want to make sure that everyone has your side of the story, to make sure that's crisp and clear. So when the sound bites are appearing on all the different networks around the world, the sound bites are all the same for everyone. So your measurements for your business continuity planning program, the measurements that you have is, does your supplier have a formal program management? Many companies will get to the table and be selected by your firm because they have a program in place, a business continuity plan. Why wouldn't they feature it? Why wouldn't they use it in their information to be selected as a client? I mentioned one of my clients in St. Louis, in central U.S., has a page that says, we'll be there for you. So if we have a disaster and you're not affected by it, we'll go to one of our supply chain partners and they'll print your service and they'll send it out. I mean, many firms use, for example, one courier service like FedEx for all their processing, but what if FedEx goes on strike? Why wouldn't you have DHL or USPS or UPS or other courier services and have accounts with them so you can just roll right over and have those as secondary and tertiary and so forth, suppliers for you, a resource for you. Little things like that can make a big difference in the scenario. So is your small business partner have a plan that's relevant to the products and service that you are buying? They have a plan. I can't tell you how many times I walk into a room, and it's happened already this year, to speak with someone, and they have a Y2K plan. And I see a few of you chuckling, even though I can't hear you or see you, but I know you are, because the Y2K plan is now 18 years old. Maybe it was funny back in 2001 and 2002. Maybe it helped a lot of people recover from the World Trade Center outage in the U.S., which was only 21 months later than Y2K. But you have people that have a Y2K plan, and you know what? We want to build on their plans. We want to take what they have and enhance what they have and make sure that they have a plan that can work for them. So maybe they are Hershey's chocolate. They've been in business for a long time, and they haven't changed their location, and they have a certain deliverable, and they have the same supply chain. Maybe their plan is about 60% correct. Even though it's 18 years old, you want to be as close to 100% as possible. Is the scope of their business continuity planning broad enough to include your interests, what you're doing? You know, they're a company that's providing a service, but you've expanded. Can they go with you and take their next step? Can they prove that they can do what's in their plan? The only way we can do that is if they're going to test and make sure that we go back and forth to make sure that they are testing and you're testing, because you're as important in their environment as they are in your environment. And are there certified practitioners on their staff, or are there certified practitioners auditing the business continuity programming? So you want to make sure you've got somebody there. It's just a little, it's not a requirement, but it's a nice to have because you want to make sure that someone has the right people on board. So what are your measurements? SLAs, financial process, you're making sure the invoices are on time, your payment status. If somebody's malingering on a payment or showing up late, they might not be sharp in other areas of their business. You want to take an interest in being involved at the level that you need them to be. You know, come up to my level where we are. If they can share their own business continuity plan, that is the utopian solution. You know, we have a plan, here it is, what do you think of it? And you say, this is great, or this needs a little help in section 3 or section 4. Do they have multitask personnel slowing down the process? So you have someone in a smaller business wearing several hats. So is that person focused on financials at the end of the quarter when they should be worried about paying your bill or doing invoicing? And then do they have any other references of any other clients or partners of theirs? Other things, the BCI in London recommends get your business continuity planning as a means to enhance risk mitigation, risk minimization. Again, for the third time, you cannot eliminate risk, but find a way to mitigate risk. Make BC planning a specific part of your procurement strategy. You want to know what's happening, where it's happening, and what you can do as you bring in different resources. Focus on your key suppliers first. Focus on the ones that bring in the most value, the most revenue, or the most important to you. It could be a public relations firm that helps you advance and advertise your solutions. Again, this mortgage firm I was with yesterday in Washington, D.C., they're growing from 400 to 600 to 800 employees in a period of 5 years. They're just building another building, and they barely moved into the other one. Why? They're doing a lot of media advertising, a lot of cable network advertising. They cater to a marketing focus that's focused on government employees and U.S. military employees, and they're doing gangbusters by doing well in those areas. So that's a really important area that makes a lot of sense for them. And they're a key supplier, and they want to look at the media companies as their key supplier because that's generating their growth. Look for single points of failure, the good old SPOF term from the old days, just like ATOD, at time of disaster, in the entire supply chain. Are there single points of failure? Is somebody providing something unique to you, like the coupler for that helicopter we mentioned, that you cannot get anywhere else? And you want to consider business continuity planning for your offshore service providers. So if someone is going offshore to a foreign country, either as a call center or as a software developer somewhere, do they have the standards to maintain the kind of solutions that are the ones that you require? So what else can you do to be better prepared? Get involved early in the process, discussing these ideas with all your partners. Educate them to meet your standards. Now, that might not be the BCP standards nationally, but what are your standards? What are your minimum requirements? What are your service level agreements? You can recommend local or national associations for them to be engaged. We were hosted by a AVP of Human Resources for a meeting earlier this week, and he's not a member of this national SHRM group with 300,000 members. And we encouraged him to be a part of that group. And it was only $50 a year to be a member, but he would get mailings, he would get magazines, and that would enhance the kind of work he's done. And look at that in different industries, in transportation, communication, financial, manufacturing, whatever those different areas are. Choose partners that speak of business continuity planning in their bids to you. We will be there for you. That's a big one. And ask their references to any issues if there was ever a disaster event. So if someone's in an area where you had a disaster event and they couldn't respond, you want to know about that ahead of time. A couple more slides and we'll wrap up here. So what else can you do to be better prepared? You look at different resources. In the U.S., you've got Homeland Security, Ready.gov is a product. The American Red Cross has a product called Ready Rating. Other states in the U.S., and I apologize, I made this generic specific to the U.S. because I know we have an international office attendance on this call. So you can look for your own resources. But in the U.S., Office of Emergency Management sites have plans, and then some of the commercial, small, medium-sized business plans can be found online. Some of them are free. Some of them cost nominal charges, $500, $1,000, whatever you can aspire in terms of your need. But you want to make sure that everybody has something that's in place that makes a lot of sense. So lessons learned. 2 slides to go. So you really want to avoid a launch if you can. Once you bring new people on board, and you've got a new product area, or you're focusing on a new market, or you're in a new geographic location, you want to make sure everybody is ready. You want to get all your ducks in order, and that's an important point, because you don't want to be running the race and still tying your sneakers as you're running down the road, running around the track. You want to bridge the disconnects between your planning and delivery stages. So if someone says that, we really need to do this, like the Hershey, the Great Meltdown, where they couldn't deliver, or the Boeing example where they were trying to get the 787s out, and they're planning, and then the delivery stages were underachieving, vis-a-vis to what their planning envisions were. Someone on your team needs visibility over each step of the process. So someone on your team, a specific point person that you can nominate, needs to be there to ask those questions and to have visibility over this process. Someone that owns that area. And again, if you've got 18 different departments in your company, and your financial group, they oversee the financial activities. If there's a marketing group, your marketing with your Salesforce.com or your Zoho or any other areas that are out there. Always be prepared for disruption to the process. You have to be prepared because something will go wrong. In the U.S., the statistics are every 5 years, once every 5 years, every company has a major disaster event. Every 5 years. What happens is you don't see it on the front page of the newspaper because many of those companies are prepared and they kind of take it in stride. But some of them go out of business. Number 5, enterprise partners are subject to issues as your small business partners. You could be General Motors and your tire company could have an issue delivering 5 million tires for your new launch of vehicles. And then I said this 100 times, your small, medium-sized business partners, as everyone, should be included in your exercises or testing. So, Rebecca, we have one more slide, and we have 2 more minutes, so I think we're on track here. We're in good shape. So your SMB firms will need some mentoring and encouragement. You're not hammering them. They're not at the sophisticated level with some of the larger firms. And if you're a small firm on this call, working with large firms, reach out to them. Say, what can we do? What would you like us to do? How can we be better? Like you would do with any situation. All firms, not just SMB, but all firms have access to business continuity planning management resources and need to embrace them. The technologies are there. They need to embrace them. And the price points are all over the map. You can plan, and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, or you can put an umbrella under you and make sure that you had a safety net and make sure you had just enough planning. All firms need to become planning partners with one another at the outset, and parting decisions need to be carefully vetted so everybody knows what the continuity planning looks like from both sides of the fence. So those are the key points of the presentation, and I wanted to thank you for attending this session. My contact information is there. Feel free to send a note to me, my name at continuitydynamics.com, or get on the website, call me on the 800 number, whatever you'd like. But I'm a resource for you. I'm delighted that you're able to attend, and will entertain any questions. But if I may, let me start with the question that I received via email yesterday from a BC manager of a company in France that has locations all over the world. They're a distribution company that distributes 4,000 products, and no product individually would cause huge impacts, but some would obviously have more of an impact than others. So are there any tools that are out there that can make sure they're focusing on the right product delivery and the right questions regarding value to the business, profitability, volume, and such? I can't speak to specific tools because I'm the disaster recovery guy. So if you're riding the bike and you get a flat tire, I'll tell you where to fix the tire. So I don't know where the tool is that can help do that, and I apologize, but I know that when you look at certain resources that I did a little homework last night to examining your target customer, looking at the value of the different product, the total cost of sales, and you have to really look intuitively at your own company, and this goes for any question, and see what you need to do to be prepared to have a, whatever widget that you're selling, at whatever price it may be able to make sure that they have whatever they need to be successful. So I can't really answer that question specifically in terms of a CRM or an ERM solution, but your own folks would know better. But the key is that whatever you do, you want to make sure that you have a way to kind of back up what that process is. So here's a process that's an electronic process. You want to make sure there's a communication aspect, a power aspect, and a resource aspect. And many people do all the planning in the world that they can and forget to print their plan. And when there's a power outage, which again is the culprit 72% of the time, you don't have power, you can't print your plan. So you have to print the plan, keep a copy at the office, a copy at home, a copy in your glove box of your car, or the trunk of your car, and you want to make sure you have that plan with you at all times. So I'm sorry I couldn't answer that question more specifically, but if you want to send a note to me, you can do that, and I'd be available to help you. Again, thank you. Rebecca, any other questions?
Hi, Ralph. Yes, we've just got 2 more questions, and they should be on your question panel to the right of your screen on the control panel.
Yep.
Can you see those there? Yeah, just a couple there. Just a couple of quick ones.
Questions?
Oh,
okay, good. How do you manage supply failures in a retail pharmaceutical environment? Well, again, a rose is a rose is a rose. If it's a pharmaceutical environment, an engineering environment, what have you, you have many different factors. The key is that you want to just look at all the different parts of it. Your vehicle is running smoothly, you've got a brand new car, and something happens that doesn't work, you've got to fix that. All of these end-to-end questions, I believe the next question is also related to it as well. Let me go get that question out here. It says, will we get a copy of the presentation? The answer is, of course, you will. So as you're running your organization and you're doing all you can to make sure that you have what you need to do to be prepared in any event, if you're a pharmaceutical firm, whatever, you just want to look introspectively at the whole process. There are 26 letters in the alphabet. If you're missing the letter J, you've got to go find the letter J somewhere else. It may not be the capital J that matches all the other capital letters that you have, but you've got to find a small J or a J in script or a J in another language that's out there that can plug in the gap. So from a pharmaceutical or any other respect, you've got to look at what you need to do, what your goals are, what your objectives are, and to make sure they're able to respond to that. So, were there any other questions, Rebecca?
I just got one last one there, a suggestion on how to engage senior management on supply chain impact. Gary Lupton there. Yes.
That's a wonderful question, and that's something that I did not get into, unfortunately, in this presentation. I was limited in my time. I wanted to go into and just claim all resources in all different directions, but senior management is going to be involved, as we discussed at length, in the communication and the crisis management response. And they need to be prepped ahead of time. And as I alluded to earlier, I made several references to this, but I didn't address it specifically. But senior management needs to know that if something goes wrong, that someone needs to be accountable. And I don't mean accountable negatively. I just mean accountable in terms of being able to back it up, that make sure that something else comes in as replacement. You have the spare tires in your trunk, and you can put it on the one of the 4 tires of the car and continue to drive. So senior management needs to know, they're going to know who your key suppliers are. They're going to know what the stakes are to running the business, and they may even know what some of the pitfalls are in terms of your areas. If you're near a train track or near an area that floods or near a plane where there might be a tornado or something that's affecting you, or you're in a glass building that could affect you, or you have tenants that are in different industries. I had a client in Kansas City who was very calm. They were an engineering firm. Everything was wonderful. I went out there, looked at the directory in the building, and there was a newspaper from a foreign, somewhat adversarial country that was published in that location, okay? So you have to look at all those aspects, but the management need to know that they're accountable in terms of communication, and they should be at the table to make sure that everyone has, and they're going to invest the resources to make sure that everyone has the ability to reach out to their own supply chain partners so those people are connected. Certain organizations have a mandate that they will not work with a third-party company unless they meet a certain specification. And we're talking about the likes of a Walmart or a Home Depot or a Boeing or major companies of that sort, Xerox. So they have to have not only a disaster recovery plan to back up data or provide services as a third-party partner, but they need to have a business continuity plan to continue the business. Anything else, Rebecca?
No, that's all the questions for today. Thank you very much, Ralph. Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting and informative, and thank you for taking time out of your day to come and do this for us. That was great.
Thank you.
So thank you to all those that attended, listened in and asked questions to Ralph. We will be sending out a copy of the webinar as today's bulletin in case you missed out on any of the content covered. If you have any feedback on this webinar, please just reply to any of the emails you have received from us, and we will take any action necessary on that. As I mentioned at the beginning, our next webinar will be part of the BCI's Education Month and will take place on Friday, the 22nd of September at 11 a.m. Chris Rhodes and Gordon Brown from Plan B Consulting will be presenting the webinar, which is titled Out with the Old, In with the New, Changing Perceptions of Business Continuity. Information about signing up to attend will be released in due course. In the meantime, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting with you in the future, and I hope you all have a lovely bank holiday weekend. Goodbye.